Hello and welcome to another episode of the All Things Considered CX podcast. My name is Bob Azman and I'm glad to have you back for an episode. Today we're kicking off 2025 and we're talking to somebody who's actually doing the work of experience in the restaurant industry. And I think you'll enjoy his background and his discussions. And so I'm happy to welcome Gregg Majewski to the podcast. Welcome, Gregg.
Thanks for having me, Bob. Excited to be here.
Great. Gregg, could you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about your background and your journey to what you're doing today?
Yeah, so I am currently Gregg Majewski, CEO and founder of Craveworthy Brands today. I got my start in the restaurant industry back with a company called Jimmy John's when there was about 24 restaurants open, and another 30 or 40 sold at that point. I entered that company as an intern and worked my way up to be CFO, COO, CEO by the time I left when there was 300 units built and north of 700 sold at that point. I went on to be one of the largest franchisees. I own restaurants across the country through different platforms. Have consulted for every major restaurant company in America. And for whatever reason, I decided I was bored and then I wanted to create Craveworthy, which is basically a restaurant operated platform company. People would say we're PE, but we're not. But we operate like a PE group ran by restaurant people. So people who know how to run the restaurant business, who look at things based on the eyes of restaurants and not just on a balance sheet or an income statement saying, hey, you got to open up 50 stores this year because damn it, we need to, instead of, hey, the brand's not there yet. Go ahead and take another year to get it to where it needs to be. And then let's make a decision on what we do.
Mhm. Great. So Gregg, with that background, I mean, from somebody who eats at restaurants, doesn't run them, it just seems like uh, a challenging industry to be in. And then you throw things like the pandemic and labor shortages and inflation and everything else on there. How do you sort through all of that? We're going to talk about the experience side of it, but how do you sort through all of that? I'm just fascinated by the industry.
So, I mean, the industry is, everyone says it's the hardest industry in the world to get into, and 100% it is. It's miserable. If you were going and trying to create your brand on your own today, mm, you hear all the horror stories, restaurants fail within 5 years and all that. What those horror stories tell you, though, is that startups fail that fast. So brands that don't have the infrastructure, the diagnostic franchises do not. And so I think people go into the restaurant business always thinking that it's way easy. Oh, I could do this. I know how to cook at home, or I know how to do this, and forget it's a certain type of expertise required to run restaurants, just like it is to go and fly an airplane or become a doctor or a lawyer. And people get insulted when I tell them that. But the fact is that if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to fail in this industry, just like any other.
Mhm.
And that's the part that has always scared people, and also why every person in America, when you talk to, oh, I'd love to own a bar, or I don't love to own a restaurant. How many of your friends have said that? They just don't realize that the work and the effort and the time that you have to put into it to make it work. You also asked about, hey, the last couple of years. The last couple of years were a death sentence to anyone in almost every business, So COVID was hopefully once in a generation, once in a lifetime, once in decades and centuries that we ever have to go through something like that. The restaurant industry was lucky to survive. I know so many people that had great establishments that are still struggling in high urban settings like New York and Chicago and Boston in the downtown markets because people aren't back to work. We had a shift. That shift's going to come back and those areas will boom again. But it was a bloodbath. I saw so many great people and friends lose their jobs because we didn't know what we were doing. And now, if we were to do it again, we wouldn't make the same mistakes that we made that time.
Mhm. Mhm.
Staffing, which industry isn't hurting for staffing right now? I mean, you talk to anybody, you talk to manufacturing, plants and stuff like that. They can't find people who want to be engineers or, run shifts or, run a machine anymore because it's not a cool job, and what people tend to forget is that America was built on those jobs And that's what makes our country sort of go, not the social media or the keyboard warriors that are out there today. It was those jobs that made America function. We're going to have to get those people back. My son brought up the other day that, you can be a electrician and make, two to $300,000, in a couple of years because they need them so bad. So again, kids are going to start realizing that there's better opportunities out there, and those jobs will come back, and then hopefully staffing comes back.
Right. I- Greg, I can really relate to your comments about owning a bar and a restaurant. Anybody can do that. A few years ago, we have a cabin up in Northwest Wisconsin, and we frequented this restaurant a lot. And the couple, this was in high season in June, but the couple's son was getting married, and they were going to close for the weekend. And I said, "Oh my gosh, it's high season. Think all the money you're going to lose, right?" And in my naivete, I said, "Hey, we'll run it for you for the weekend. How hard can it be to run a restaurant? You got a chef, you got the server, right?" I've never been so exhausted. We literally ran it for 36 hours. I've never been so exhausted. And I said, I'm going to start a consulting company for people that want to own bars and restaurants to work in one for just 2 days and dispel the concept of how hard work it is, because then you add in things like people calling in sick, or more people arriving than you expected. And so it was a fascinating experience for me that I tell all the time because it's so challenging of an industry. So Greg, tell me a little bit about how do you create these experiences? I mean, you grew Jimmy John's. You're now growing a portfolio of brands. How do you create these experiences in your restaurants that keep people coming back? I mean, that's what we're talking about today, is the experience.
I mean, in the restaurant industry, it obviously starts with the food. If you have crap food, you're not going to survive very long. There's a lot of restaurants that I do big numbers that have mediocre food. None of them have crap food. So your food's always got to be key. You always got to be re-engineering and reevaluating and extending the menu, and, not extending the menu, but refreshing the menu to make sure it stays current in today's times. Now there's a lot of one-trick ponies that have made a ton of money in this last couple of years. Raising Cane's is one of them. It's chicken tenders, fries, and, toast. Everyone thought that was the way you could go and copy and do something as simple over and over again. They caught lightning in a bottle. And every once in a while, that lightning in a bottle works, but otherwise, most people have to continue to be aggressive with menus and items and stuff like that to keep themselves relevant in today's market. COVID helped Raising Cane's. They were a drive-through focused brand. They were able to be open. People became dependent on it. It worked at that moment. But you've got to have incredible food, a product that people want. And more importantly, you've got to have hospitality. This industry, and you haven't probably seen it in the last 3 or 4 years because it's struggled so much, but we're the backbone of what makes our industry so great is that, and why people come into the restaurants, they want to be taken care of. It doesn't matter if you're ordering a McDonald's burger or a white tablecloth restaurant. You want come in because you want something for it. You want what they're known for: convenience, quality, speed, and someone doing it with a smile and not an attitude that I can't believe I have to do this for you. You come in because you've made your decision that instead of cooking at home, you want it in the way, for whatever reason that brand is, you want it that way. You want to be taken care of. And so we take a great pride in the fact that hospitality has to be a focal point. Every customer that walks through our doors is our guest. And it sounds stupid. A restaurant, you're my guest. Of course. But yet that's something that's forgotten by so many. You chose to pick us. You chose to come through our door. We have to be thankful. We have to be gracious, and we got to make sure we do everything we can to give you what you wanted or what your expectations were when you walked in.
So Greg, let's talk a little bit about, you said the updating menus and so forth and food selection. So in customer experience in the profession, we spend lots of time surveying, right? We're doing in-depth research, we're doing transaction surveys, relationship loyalty surveys. We're just overwhelming in our industry with surveys. How do you know what the tastes are that are changing with the consuming public, and get out ahead of those?
I wish there was a simple answer. There's not. You don't know. I mean, and that's why you see all the restaurant chains do these LTOs and stuff like that. They're sort of dipping their toes in to see what works and what doesn't work and where the consumer is going. It's not because, and yes, it drives traffic and everything else, but it's also how far can we push something and still make it ours? The consumer is fickle. Moods change, flavors change. You can get the list of hot flavors for this year or the next 5 years, and oh, I'm going to go and do all of those. Well, none of them may hit. You still got to be true to what the brand is and in the identity of what the brand is, adding those unique tweaks. So, as an example, let's just say mango was hot as hell a couple years ago, and actually it was probably more than a couple years ago. Everyone started doing mango chutney or mango, salsa and stuff like that to sort of top it. There was a trend that sort of kicked on, but yet we went too far. Instead of making it just what it was, a sort of cool little extra feature, people started overusing it, and now you don't, it's not cool anymore. It's, oh, you have that. It's not, doesn't really drive. You've got to sort of be on top of it, and there's gambles when you do it. I wish there was a way to know exactly what the next trend's going to be. But if you look at crumble, for example, nobody in their right mind would have thought a $6 cookie was going to be the big wave and blow up the way it was did. Right time, right place, Instagram, social media drove it. People were in the right mood because of COVID and wanting that gluttony of extra to make themselves feel good, and they took off. And I have a brand that followed it that came out right about the same time that we're growing at a much slower pace because we knew that we couldn't just be a one-trick pony. We can't just be cookies. And now if you look at Crumble, they're now cakes and other sweets and other desserts because the tree that started to fall off. So now how do you get revenue back up? You constantly got to be evolving in this industry, more so than any other,
Mhm.
because you don't know when your moment's done.
That's really, this is just a really interesting conversation from clearly an expert in the industry. When you talked about hospitality, again, following up on some of your comments earlier about hospitality and having guests in your restaurant, which I love that approach. How do you define that? I'm sure it's different or maybe not by every brand, but how do you define that? How do I feel that as I walk in your restaurant?
I mean, it's again being greeted as soon as you walk through the door with a smile.
Mm,
I mean, and you can look at how Walmart or Chick-fil-A has defined hospitality over the years. And when people go to Chick-fil-A, not because it's the greatest food in the world, it's consistent, it's high quality, it's good, they go because they're left feeling special. The service
mm,
level is through the roof. They say my pleasure. Every person on that team buys into their culture, and they give an experience that sets the tone for everything else you have. You could have the worst burger or worst chicken sandwich ever in that case because they messed it up, but because they said thank you and yes, ma'am, and all this when you walk away, you don't feel bad even though it's messed up because they took care of you. They they appreciate the fact that you stood in line or waited through the drive-through and made the choice to be a part of their community for that moment. That's where it starts. And then it goes throughout the entire process. It's how you market to them afterwards, how you send emails. Do you just blast them with text messages saying, come back in? Do you keep that level of hospitality in every aspect of what you're doing and make sure that that's part of the true DNA of a brand? That's where restaurants tend to fail. You can be great in the store, but then you forget that you have to continue to market it the same way after. And Chick-fil-A has
mhm,
done that continually. Every part of their marketing is about the community or yes or thank you. And you can tell that they care about their people. That drives
mhm,
traffic.
mhm. Well, and of course, having that kind of culture, like you just said, helps their employees deliver that kind of service. I mean, it goes hand in hand with the two. Um, in, we also talk a lot about return on investment, and I don't mean by that equipment, but investing in the customer experience. So, going to executive teams and the struggle that CX professionals have in getting executive teams to invest in the experience, be it technology, be it training, be it more people, whatever it is. And I'm assuming margins are rather thin in the restaurant business. Um, what's that challenge for you all in balancing that guest hospitality with the need, obviously, to make a profit in your organizations?
I mean, as you said, every business needs to make money. If you don't, you're out of business. So I mean, that's always part of it. The part of the issue in the restaurant industry, and that has been for some time, is that we brought non-restaurant people in to run restaurant companies. And we brought in the consultants and the MBAs and everything else that have lost the fact that it starts with the four walls, and what happens in those four walls and your consumer is what matters. And so they make cuts that take away those level of hospitality because they don't know any better. They don't know the industry. And so you've seen some major chains over the course of the last 5 to 10 years struggle because they got a bunch of MBA people that have come in that have said cut, 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 cut. Eventually you cut what the brand's important and what the brand was known for. In the restaurant industry, I'm a big, big believer in that you got to continue to grow and provide more for less and make sure that your consumers are somehow feeling more and more special every day, because eventually there's going to be some other person on the block that's going to take them away from you because they're going to treat them nicer than you do. And that's ordering, how you order, your third party ordering, whatever it is, your ordering platform, the ease of customer ordering, the kiosks that you put in because you do have to save labor, whatever it is, has to be the best. You still have to have that level of hospitality with that. So the people who figure that out will be the people that win.
Mm-hmm. Listeners, we're talking to Gregg Majewski, who is CEO of Craveworthy Brands, talking about the restaurant industry, customer experience, and some other topics. And you mentioned it, Greg, and I want to talk about that now. Is how are artificial intelligence and so forth is huge in our industry right now. How are you incorporating technology to advance the brands that you manage?
I mean, so let's think about where the restaurant industry was prior to COVID. We didn't get tech. Tech was like the POS and a couple other things. That was the amount of what we had at our access, online ordering, that type of stuff. Restaurants didn't invest in it. COVID has made a huge push to add all these new things to us at such a fast pace that right now we're drinking from a fire hose on what should be, because we've never seen this much tech in our industry. Um, I don't know where AI is going to end up taking us. I don't know if it's going to fix all our problems, but I don't think AI can solve for the human touch of what a restaurant is. And so my team and I have these arguments continually like, hey, how do you respond to a customer complaint? We have a tool with AI that will automatically write and address it. To me, it lacks the personal touch, doesn't have the heart that you need when you screw up or when you want to say thank you. AI is not there yet. Will it be? Probably. Should it be the one taking orders? I don't know. Because do you really want to talk to a robot when you're making a decision on where you're going to spend your money? Or do you want something easy and fast where you have that little bit of community? And again, even with a kiosk, put the kiosk in, you got to have someone out there to make sure they understand how to use it and ask them if they need any help. Provide that level of service to them, because yes, there's a generation that doesn't need you to talk to them, but there's a huge population that still wants to be told thank you, and a machine doesn't say it.
Mm-hmm. So, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in the restaurant industry? You said about technology, but what are some other things you're seeing in the restaurant industry?
I mean, technology is the biggest one. Robots and robotics is obviously the next one in the back of the house. How do you eliminate labor?
Mm,
With the rising cost of labor, obviously everything in our industry is built around that. How do we go ahead and do the same with less? And that's going to be our biggest struggle over the next couple of years, and why you've seen inflation and the restaurant prices go up so fast. At one point during COVID, obviously we had the COGS go up, all our materials, couldn't get them, produce, all that went up in the air. So we had to raise our prices. Now we're having to raise prices because labor's going up so fast. And so the consumer is now paying, and you hear these stories all the time in the media and everything else. You can go to McDonald's, and for the same price that you buy two burgers and a fries at McDonald's, you can go sit down at Chili's and get a $9.99 burger and fries. So why would you go to McDonald's when you can have Chili's for the same price? You've now
mhm,
priced yourself in this price quandary of where you're going to need to go. That's going to be the next major challenge, and where you're going to see everything sort of balance between. how do you get your pricing back to the American public? And how do you, survive and not outprice yourself in there? And so the technology is all going to go around those fronts. And the ones that
Mhm.
figure it out, that keep hospitality and the quality of food and what a restaurant has always been about, is that experience, there will be the ones that win. And I wish I had an
Mhm.
answer, but I don't, on what that's going to take.
Mhm.
Um, we've made a decision to not overdo kiosks. We've made a decision not to replace front of the house staff. Uh, a decision to invest in back of the house improvements so I can reduce the cost there.
Mhm. That
But I,
that
but
that's
I,
go ahead. Mhm.
but I won't reduce anything that affects my consumer. What the consumer sees, I don't want to take that experience away.
Mhm. That and that's interesting for listeners to hear about front and back of the house investments. And I think that's a key learning too for us, is that, we have to improve our processes. We have to improve the delivery of our products and services, but we also have to deliver it on the service side in the front of the house, so to speak, regardless of whether you're in the restaurant business or not. Greg, a question for you is, I've noticed some restaurants that are going to no, I won't use your terminology correctly, but no seating. It's strictly a drive-through restaurant. You just drive
Yep.
around. Is that a trend, or what's driving that? And maybe some
That
of
was
your
a
restaurants are like that. I'm not sure, but.
that was a COVID trend. So everybody through COVID went smaller and drive through because those were the restaurants that were successful during that time. Um, it's still a trend. It's the wrong trend because you can only do so much business going through that way. You still need people who want to sit down and not eat in their cars. That's a big part of the population. Um, during COVID, you had no choice. I
Mhm.
never ate in my car. I would go somewhere, I'd sit, I'd even pull out a table out my back with my family and we'd sit outside at a table. Yes, because that was the option, but I did not want to eat food in my car. And I think there's a lot of people like that. But during COVID, we all pivoted to drive through only. That trend will die, and you'll see us going back to more of the standard restaurants and that experience. It will never be 6, 7, 8,000 square foot boxes again. It may be 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 slim down with a drive through, but that's going to be the mix that you're going to see win.
Mhm. Well, and that, again, from an outsider's perspective, you look at, that's a pretty significant commitment when you put a structure up, right? And say, I'm only going to be drive-through. I mean, if that trend goes away, do restaurants like that have the capability to reconfigure and create, interior
No.
eating areas, or they kind of, no?
There's a couple
Yeah.
brands that do canister stores. So the shipping containers, and that's sort of their stores. And they drop them in and there's no
Oh.
seating at all. There's no way to expand those. I have been scared to death of those because what do you do with them after? Because who's going to take that real estate? Who's going to put anything in that afterwards? Um, I won't do it. But again, they're selling out like hotcakes right now because the trend is that smaller footprint and all that. But 3 to 4 years from now, when everything's cyclical and it goes back to
Mhm.
people wanting to dine in, are you going to be able to get enough cars through to continue to do the volume to eat a burger that you have to take home? We'll see.
Mhm. Right. Amazing. Um, Greg, this has been a great conversation, and I was really looking forward to it because we just haven't had a lot of discussions about the restaurant industry, and it's a fascinating industry. So my final question or two is, all your years of experience in this industry, you know, and you've shared some with us, but maybe summarize in a couple of learnings that you can share from an experience standpoint that stand out for you, that say, this is what I've learned and this is how I'm applying it for our listeners.
You're never smarter than the consumer.
Mm.
So when your consumer and your customer starts telling you something, they tend to be on, you did something to alienate them. So take the feedback with heart. Don't put a shield around yourself thinking that you're right. Listen to the people that are in the field and all that on a day in and day out basis to what the consumer is actually telling you. You'll usually know months before most people, if you listen and watch the feedback from a restaurant or from any business, what the result is going to be and where you made a mistake and how to fix it. But you actually have to listen to your consumer. Most important thing I could ever tell anybody.
And real quick follow up on that is what are the listing posts that you have that you can
So
gain that information?
we use a customer survey platform called Ovation. That every customer gets a survey afterwards. It's usually a 1 or 2 question survey. If it's not good, you get more, but if it's good, you sort of move on and we're good. And it sort of gives us again, this is where AI comes in. We can digest them and sort of look for keywords, and it analyzes all of them for a restaurant that we can start seeing a trend of what the issues are in those restaurants. To me, that's the most important tool that we have, as much as, hey, my back of house system and all that is my favorite. And I couldn't do my business without them. This is the one that puts my pulse on my customer more than anything.
Mm-hmm. That's great to hear. And the whole idea that you're taking that feedback and incorporating it into process change. A lot of organizations gather the information but don't do anything with it, don't apply it, don't take action against it. And that's another big push that we have is collect the data, but if you're going to collect it, do something with it. So
My
uh,
team hates me because on a Saturday or Sunday, I'm the one responding to them because I get them before at the same time the stores do. And we'll be laying there watching a game and I'll start answering customer complaints. And they'll come back to me and say, that's not the way it happened. It doesn't matter if that's the way it happened. That's the way it was perceived. So now we have
right.
to go ahead and fix it for the consumer. It doesn't matter where we goofed up. It matters what the customer thought we goofed up.
Well, absolutely. And I'll just add to that, the fact that you do that is a lesson to be learned from executives around the country, world, because a CEO taking the time to read and listen to complaints or survey, excuse me, not necessarily complaints, but surveys is so important. And it's so unusual, unfortunately. So hats off to you for modeling that behavior. That's pretty cool, Greg. So
So yeah, I mean, because it's the only way, that's the industry. You have to.
yeah, right, right. Well, and I would argue it applies to all industries. You have to listen to what your customers are saying, and I appreciate that comment that you made. Greg, this has been fantastic. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. It has been a blast.
It has. Listeners, this has been another episode of the All Things Considered CX podcast. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Greg for joining us. And we look forward to you joining us on another episode in the future. Thank you.